A rise of Barcelona. Barcelona is a city on the coast of northeastern Spain. It is the capital and largest city of the autonomous community of Catalonia, as well as the second most populous municipality of Spain. Within the city limits, it is having a population of 1.6 million, and it is home to around 4.8 million people, making it the fifth most populous urban area in the European Union after Paris. Barcelona has a rich cultural heritage and is today an important cultural center and a major tourist destination. Particularly renowned are the architectural works of Antoni Gaudí and Luis Domènech I Montaigne, which have been designated UNESCO World Heritage Sites. City formation. The city's origins trace back to the Romans, who settled in the area in 2015 BC and, in the 1st century BC, built the medieval city of Barcelona. It was small, surrounded by a wall roughly 1.5 kilometers in circumference, with the characteristic Roman grid of perpendicular streets. In these modest beginnings are already visible to characteristics that would define Barcelona's development over the years. First, it began, and has always remained, a bounded and compressed city, dense from its founding. First, physical walls and then the limits of geography have hemmed the city in and ensured that its residents are crammed tightly together. And second, it has always been an intentional city, closely conceived and constructed by central planners. There have been very few periods of unplanned growth in Barcelona history. Unlike so many newer cities, it has not sprawled. Each new burst of growth has been on purpose. There has always been a plan. Over the centuries, the city has been transformed again and again at the hands of visionaries, mostly notably architect Ildefonso Cerda, still considered one of history's great urban planners. After the Roman Empire fell in the 5th century, in the Middle Ages, the city grew and became more complex. In 1714, the War of the Spanish Succession ended, and Barcelona was on the losing side. Growing population into more centuries, by the middle of the 19th century, population density was the highest in Spain, working conditions were miserable, sewage was out of control, water was dirty, and the city was struck by a series of cholera epidemics and riots. By 1854, when the Spanish government finally gave permission to take the wall down, it was one of the most hated structures in Europe. It took 12 years to completely remove it. After the wall's demolition was announced, plans began for an expansion of the city. In 1855, the central Spanish government approved a plan by architect Ildefonso Cerda. Cerda is a legendary figure in urban planning circles. Two things are worth noting about Cerda's plan. First, he wanted to ensure that each citizen had, on a per capita basis, enough water, clean air, sunlight, ventilation, and space. His blocks were oriented northwest to southeast to maximize daily sun exposure. And second, each block, manzana, was to be of almost identical proportions, with buildings of regular height and spacing and a preponderance of green space. Commerce was to take place on the ground floor. The bourgeoisie were to live on the floor above, rather than in mansions at the edge of town, and the workers were slated for the upper floors. In this way, they would all share the same streets and public spaces, exposed to the same hygienic conditions, reducing social distance and inequality. Each 20-square block district was meant to be largely self-contained, with its own shops and civic facilities. Hospitals, parks, and plazas were to be spaced evenly throughout the city, to maximize equality of access. Excluding the already developed Old Town and the two diagonal avenues intended to bisect the plain, the pattern of regular rectilinear blocks, exactly 113.3 by 113.3 meters, for 12,370 square meters, with at least 800 square meters for gardens, was to be replicated all the way to the borders of nearby settlements. The streets were to be wide enough to allow for the free flow of pedestrians, goods, and commerce, in the original plan, 35 meters wide. A regular grid is comprehensible and easily navigable. There are multiple routes to any destination and regularly spaced choices. Like Legos, the blocks have been built and rebuilt many times for many different uses. Originally, each of Sardar's blocks was to have buildings on just two sides, sometimes three, occupying less than 50% of the total area, with the bulk of the interior space devoted to gardens and green space. The buildings were to be low enough, no more than 20 meters tall and 15 to 20 meters deep, to allow for almost continuous sunlight in the interiors during the day. The goal was to combine the advantages of rural living, green space, fresh air and food, community, with the advantages of urban living, commerce, culture, free flow of goods and ideas. Though Sardar designed the city before automobiles, he included wide streets and his famous chamfered, 45-degree corners in anticipation of urban steam trams distributing goods and people. They would need lots of room to turn. Seriously, the design has, to Barcelona's current dismay, proven extraordinarily accommodating to motor vehicles. Many of the areas created by the chamfered corners are now used for parking. Along with his design, Sardar also developed a strict set of economic principles and building bylaws governing the construction of the manzanas to ensure that his vision was implemented. But when the Spanish government selected his plan in 1860, it did not ratify his principles and bylaws. That turned out to be significant. Sardar's original design was a humanitarian marvel. If it had been built as conceived and survived to the present day, it would count among the world's most progressive urban plans. But that was not its fate. It was, eventually, mostly, implemented, but not as Sardar envisioned. In fact, he was shunned by the city and his work fell into virtual obscurity. The modernist transformation of Barcelona that never happened. In the early 1930s, a group of architects called CATSPAC, Catalan Group of Technical Architects for the Solution of Problems of Contemporary Architecture, conceived a new plan for the city that would have meant a thorough transformation. The group was led by architect Joseph Louis Sert, a follower and eventually colleague of the famous French rationalist architect Le Corbusier. Le Corbusier helped CATSPAC develop the Murcia plan, which reconceived Barcelona along grand modernist lines as a political and cultural capital. The plan contained all the aspirations and flaws of modernism. In its way, it was humanitarian, with great attention paid to the hygiene and green space needed by workers. In fact, it was in large part conceived to preempt a revolution of the working classes. Regardless, the Murcia plan was never implemented. Instead, a civil war arrived, which ended in 1939. The period was anomalous in the city's urban history, characterized by mainly unregulated construction using cheap materials, often in suburbs at the periphery of the city, to quickly accommodate workers moving from other parts of Spain. The end of dictatorship and the arrival of democracy set off a series of small, locally focused, often self-funded urban improvements, which bolstered the city enough to win it the 1992 Summer Olympics. And the Olympics led to the biggest urban transformation since Sardar's. Along with a range of other projects and new green spaces, the 1992 Olympics transformed Barcelona into a fully modern global city and a hugely popular tourist destination. In recent years, Barcelona has been grappling with the consequences of its spiraling success. Familiar to many growing cities, it is overrun by tourists. Real estate prices are rising due to foreign speculation. Gentrification is pushing out long-time residents, and there are too many cars, bringing with them noise, air pollution, and congestion. In a city as compressed and crowded as Barcelona, these problems are no longer tolerable. The task for urban planners now is to harness the city's success in service of yet another transformation into a model for the 21st century, designed around people and public spaces rather than motor vehicles. Superblocks. A typical superblock, as found for example in Barcelona, consists of 3 times 3 city blocks, each separated by outer streets. Within the blocks, the streets are free from through traffic. Redesigning street space within superblocks offers new opportunities to adapt cities to climate change by using it to implement heat mitigation measures. The clusters of inner minor streets called green streets. Vehicles are allowed primarily for accessing residences, public transport, disabled people, emergency vehicles, and bicycles used for recreation only. Cyclists using bicycles as the primary mode of transport are likely to move faster. Hence, they will have to abide by a speed limit. The limit is the same as for hand scooters and other vehicles of 10 km per hour within the superblock. Further, motorized vehicular movement is in only one direction. The roads thus become public spaces that are open and safe for use by pedestrians for varying purposes. In 2005, 2 more superblocks in Gracia were planned. Pilot projects started in 2014 and increased pedestrian trips by 10%, accounting for 2,01,843 trips annually. The trips by cyclists went up by 30% as well. Superblocks initiative goes hand in hand with redefining mobility. The 2024 Urban Mobility Plan focuses on transforming the mobility patterns in Barcelona. The aim is to reduce private vehicles' journeys from 26.04% to 18.48%. Another target is to have 81.54% of all journeys on foot, bicycle, and public transport journeys by 2024. The green axis for the superblock project are meant to connect green areas, transit stops, and commercial activities. The plazas or squares formed at junctions of intersecting green streets will become locations for socializing, leisure activities, play areas, etc. Thank you for watching. Please like, comment, share and subscribe.